What's going on, everybody? Today we are breaking down all things about the 2025 Arizona Cardinals, including if year two will provide elite results from Marvin Harrison Jr., if Kyler Murray still boasts top 5 upside in fantasy land, if Trey McBride is a good bet in round 2 of fantasy drafts, can we finally see James Conner not break through ADP? I wouldn't bet on it. All that and much, much more here on today's Fantasy Life show. Of course, I cannot accomplish this alone, and accordingly, I am joined by Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, the man with the great hair himself, Dwain, the Rock McFarland. Plenty of great stuff to get to with my buddy Dwain today. First, though, guys, let's get right into this Marvin Harrison Jr. discussion with a look at the fantasy crystal ball presented by DraftKings. Dwain, it is one of these things where, look, Marvin Harrison Jr., all the expectations that come with being, Marvin Harrison's son, with being the 4th overall pick in the NFL draft. I don't want to be too disappointed here, okay? The guy did have 885 yards and 8 touchdowns. Those are good numbers that honestly stack up very similarly to what his dad did as a rookie. That said, when we had to draft him as a legit top 10 wide receiver in fantasy land, that's where the disappointing angle comes into play. So again, last year didn't go great relative to expectations. You'd like to think he can build on that in year 2. That said, we're not exactly getting a discount because this man is once again going inside the top 15 wide receivers. Are you still willing to buy into Marvin Harrison Jr. despite the price really not being too much cheaper?
Yeah, I still want to buy. It's not like I want to be buying him every time. I will say you get to a point in the draft, Ian, where again, you start to have questions around other players, right? Where Marvin Harrison Jr. goes, you got Tyreek Hill, right? Who's getting older, didn't have a good year last year. You got T. Higgins, who had a really good year last year, but also has dealt with injuries. He had a touchdown spike. Joe Burrow had a massive season. Other than that, T. Higgins has been more of a wide receiver too. You got Garrett Wilson right there going after him, who's got to deal with Justin Fields as a passer. So I think he's in a range of guys there, right? Where it's kind of like, okay, we could nitpick a question. I think Rashee Rice has rightfully so just cleared all of those guys. Like it took a little bit, but he should have really always been ahead of them. So you got A.J. Brown, Ladd McConkey, Rashee Rice, very clear the way we feel about all those guys. And then you get this next group of players, which I also put JSN in this group as well. So I'm working right now on a breakout article, guys. Sorry, it's not hit yet, but we've been working on our new site, which you guys can go check out. You can use code QB10, QB10 for your discount. But looking at this breakout article, one of the things I really wanted to start to break down, Ian, is just looking at historically what players have done, whenever they're entering that breakout season, or what are some of the traits that we've seen that have led to breakouts, and like how big of a deal are some of these things. So let's just start with Marvin Harrison Jr. To your point, what he did last year. Did he pay off on that draft capital that you spent? No, but he was still a wide receiver 3 in fantasy points per game in PPR. So 11.7 points per game going back to 2011. 11.5 is the cutoff. So that would be a low end wide receiver 3. Target share, 21%. That's borderline wide receiver 2 worthy going back to 2011. Targets per route run, 21%. That's a wide receiver 3 number. Now, man, he was great against man coverage, which is actually a pretty good indicator for a rookie. 28% targets per route run against man, but only 19% targets per route run against zone, which is where they do really go heavily to Trey McBride in the offense. Yeah. Yards per route run, 1.63, right? So more of a wide receiver 4 going back historically. And then PFF receiving grade, he got a 77.2, which historically has been a wide receiver 2. So fantasy points per game, wide receiver 3. Most of his underlying data points, which is the second thing we check, they're somewhere between a wide receiver 2 and a wide receiver 4. So I went back and did the research. Okay, what did it look like for guys that were wide receiver 2s as a rookie? What percentage? This would be Ladd McConkey, a really strong wide receiver 2 as a rookie. What percentage of them went on to be a wide receiver 1 in the following year? 33%. Okay, but now let's take a step down. What did the wide receiver 3 finishers look like that had similar numbers to Marvin Harrison as far as their underlying data points? 26%. So it's like really close. I mean, guys that were wide receiver 3s were almost as likely to turn into wide receiver 1s as guys that were wide receiver 2s as rookies. So here's the other thing. Another way that you can look at it. You can put those two numbers together, right? And you got 26%. Well, it's not put two together. You can look at the other part, which is 43% of the comparisons to Marvin Harrison Jr. went on to be a wide receiver 2 in their second year. So 26% became a wide receiver 1, 43% became a wide receiver 2. You guys can do the math on that. 69% of the time it works all the time. But I mean, basically 70% of the time, like, you got at least a wide receiver 2 out of the deal, right? And now, don't get me wrong, there's going to be some areas there where you could bust and you don't get the payoff, but that's not terrible. That's not terrible. And I think the big point people should take away is just because you were a wide receiver 3 as a rookie in fantasy performance and some of these underlying metrics doesn't really give you that much better of a hit rate versus the guys that were wide receiver 2s in their rookie year. And that's a positive thing, I think, for Marv. Having said all that, there are still questions. There are still questions about, do we like the offense? Do we like Kyler Murray to really ever be able to support, more than 2 fantasy weapons? I think you can definitely, break all those things down. But from a pure standpoint, right, of what we've seen historically, I think that Marv definitely has a chance to turn into a wide receiver 1 this year. Elite, I don't know. Your question on the show sheet says, can he give us elite wide receiver 1 production? I don't know. That's probably a stretch, but I feel like he could get to wide receiver 1.
I just wish we had something going on with the personnel or the coaching staff that said, okay, this is changing, so now we have more reason for upside. Right now, Dwain, it's like that Jack picture of him from like a month ago. Like, that's, I guess, what we're hanging our hat on with bringing out the better players. So again, he was just a rookie. Okay. We certainly see wide receivers get better during these first few years of their career. Not every single person can be Malik Neighbors out of the gate. So I don't want to hang that too much against him, but man, Drew Petzing back again. And just the uses last year, there was never any easy buttons being pushed from Marvin Harrison Jr. In fact, 25% of his targets came on go routes, slot fades, and anything of that variety. That was the highest mark of any wide receiver with at least 70 targets last year. So on the one hand, yeah, maybe an extra year with Kyler Murray, they're going to hit on a few more of those contested slot fades. On the other hand, those aren't the sort of targets that exactly, go hand in hand with high-end efficiency, even for the league's best quarterback wide receiver connections in the first place. So, yeah, it'd be cooler if we got, more screens and crossers, yak sort of plays from Marv. But I don't know that I blame the Cardinals for not going out of the way to get him those, because that's never really been his skill set. He only forced 5 missed tackles in the entire final season at Ohio State. Dwain, he had one missed tackle force all of last season. And again, I know he's not being built up, but he looked a lot more like Courtland Sutton out there than Brian Thomas Jr., one of these, top 10 wide receivers. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with Courtland Sutton, just like there's nothing wrong with what Marvin Harrison Jr. did last year. But when I start looking at just the current ADP of wide receivers, okay, everyone going in the top 24, the single biggest difference in where they finished last year and where they're being projected right now is Marvin Harrison Jr. Wide receiver 41 in PPR points per game last year, now going off the board as a wide receiver 14. Plus 27 is that difference. Tyreek Hill at plus 15, Xavier Worthy at plus 19 are the only 2 other guys even close to that number. So again, it's not so much that I don't think Marv can turn in top 24 numbers instead, but man, going in that range, guys like Garrett Wilson, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, he has not stood out for me. So not completely out on the guy, but we'll say among that group, Dwain, I've not been going out of my way to click on the artist known as Maserati Marv.
Yeah, it's just funny how fantasy works, though, right? I mean, Devontae Adams, we love him, but he's getting older, and he could drop off at any point. The players that are at Marv's age are the guys that make the biggest leaps typically. So, I mean, I get what you're saying. I think what you have to think about is the way that the breakout curves typically work. And it really comes back to, your belief in Marv, as a prospect. It sounds like you're a little more worried because of the yak and some of these other things. For me, I even though it sounds like I am super in the weeds of it, like I am to do the research, but like kind of the zoom out view I have of it is really good prospect, throw everything else out the window, who had a wide receiver 3 season. I know where he ultimately ranked last year, but historically, going back to 2011, 11 and a half fantasy points per game has been a wide receiver 3. He scored 11.7. So I've got a guy that was a wide receiver 3 that was a really good profile coming out. He's going into his second season, really similar to JSN, who's a guy that a lot of people were down on. Now, you didn't have to spend this draft pick on JSN last year. You're going to take JSN like round 6 of your fantasy draft versus having to take him in round 3. And so the opportunity costs, are definitely there. So if you take Marv, he needs to come through. And despite all that information I gave you, like 30% of these guys that comp to him, like ended up being nothings. So it is a pretty high draft pick to be, to have a 30% chance of him being a nothing. I think the thing we just have to remember is the certainty that we have around all these other players, there's also question marks with age, with Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams. And then you get T. Higgins. He's really more often been a wide receiver too. So totally feel where you're coming. I'm mixing Marvin Harrison Jr. in. If I got to have one fantasy draft, right, and I'm told then I have to go live on an island. No one's told me this. I would take this assignment though, guys, that I got to draft one fantasy team and then I had to go live on an island and just write about that one team. I don't know that I would take Marv. Like I probably wouldn't draft him with where he's going. So, I mean, that's probably saying all I need to say.
My wife's been watching this Love Island show that everyone's all, I guess, excited about in the pop culture world. Fantasy Island, Dwayne, where we put you and 11 other lonely analysts on an island and just, battle it out over a guillotine league fantasy island. Oh my gosh, let's stop what we're doing and make that happen right now. But now we'll keep on talking some Cardinals, guys. Again, this has been the Fantasy Crystal Ball presented by DraftKings. Wimbledon is almost here, and the excitement is building with the game's biggest stars set to battle it out on the sport's most iconic stage. Every serve, volley, and rally could make history. Check out DraftKings Pick 6, the exciting new way to play daily fantasy sports. All new customers who play just $5 will score $50 in bonus picks, perfect for riding the highs of every match. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and sign up with code FANTASYLIFE to claim your offer. Only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. Mentioned it a little bit in our Marv discussion, Dwayne, but Kyler Murray certainly wasn't exactly helping the cause for this Cardinals offense last year. They weren't bad, and they actually had some very good numbers in the second half specifically. Also want to give out to Kyler and the rest of these dual threat quarterbacks for what they do in the run game. Really, this explosiveness and EPA per rush, they were right up there with the Ravens for the best groups in the league. So Kyler, I do think, has a greater impact on this offense than sometimes we give him credit for. That said, in terms of Fantasyland in particular, he did not return to sort of, high-end production we were hoping for when a lot of us were drafting him as the QB6, this time last season. So thoughts on Dwayne, if Kyler can actually get back to supplying, that 20-plus fantasy points per game upside that we saw a bit earlier in his career.
Yeah, people are going to hate this because I think people have Kyler fatigue. But yes, Kyler Murray has the upside that we're looking for. If you look at him in the ceiling floor model over at Fantasy Life, the floor 15.3 fantasy points per game, median projection 18.6. The ceiling is 24.1. That's the sixth highest in the model. Why is that? Because he's averaged 34 rushing yards per game over the last 3 seasons to go with 222 passing yards per game. You go back to 2011, you look at quarterbacks that have done that, Ian, 4 out of 6 have managed to go on and score 22 fantasy points per game. Why do we talk about 22 fantasy points per game? That's the average finish for a top 3 quarterback since 2011. Now, the bar's moving a little higher with some of the seasons we've gotten from Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen over just recent years, but I still think that top 5 to 6 upside is there for Kyler Murray. I know people don't want to hear it. They're really probably tired of it, but the bottom line is the fact that he can just do things in 2 different areas that still there's very few other human beings on the planet that can do the things that Kyler can do. Can Kyler keep his head right? Can Kyler do all the other things that it takes to be an NFL quarterback and ultimately unlock this ceiling? We don't know, but it's certainly in his range of outcomes. And there's so many other quarterbacks where they just don't have the range of outcomes that Kyler has. So he is my QB 10, Ian, right now. And I think I am the highest guy over at Fantasy Life, but it's just hard to get him much lower than that whenever you look at what he can do as a rusher and a passer.
QB10, Dwayne, that might be our Fantasy Life premium promo code that you guys can go use to get 10% off, but that is not the highest ranking among the rankers. I do have Kyler sitting as my QB8, pretty much for the reasons you just said. When you do look at that batch of quarterbacks, the Bakers, Mahomes, Purdy, Nicks, on those guys, they just don't have that best case rushing ceiling that Kyler brings to the table, which we saw in 2020 when he had 9.2 fantasy points per game from just rushing. Unfortunately, since then, he hasn't even managed to crack 5.5, so it has been looking more and more like an outlier. It's just trying to read the tea leaves and see if they are going to be able to get back to that facet of his game. We actually did hear Kyler say, I believe in April, that he is, quote unquote, open to running more. Mentioned how the knee injury is a bit more behind him. I do kind of worry about some of this because we also had Drew Petzing saying last August that this was a situation, actually Jonathan Gannon, but he was saying it was night and day with Kyler between, 2023 and 2024. And while Kyler did scramble more last year, man, he looked fine to me, Dwayne. He was throwing his number 1 finger up at at the 50-yard line like he's Deion Sanders as he's about to break off a big run. But again, we just didn't see him run really enough. When he did, it was great. Just didn't quite get there enough, which, yeah, when you're Kyler's size trying to stay healthy, maybe not the worst real-life decision for him. But end of the day, again, it's a situation where just the profile that he has matches the top 4 quarterbacks closer than pretty much anyone else out there, including Justin Fields. So for that reason, I am willing to rank him as my QB8. Been willing to draft him plenty because I've been getting a lot of Trey McBride in, the round 2-3 turn as well. So again, even if I'm a little bit pessimistic that he's going to get back to partying like his 2020 again, on a scale from 1 to 10, how shocked would I be if he averages 20 fantasy points per game? Maybe like a 2. Not very.
Yeah, and I just think I just think that you feel pretty good about the median projection as well, right? Which is just going to keep him in the top 12 quarterbacks, even if he doesn't go nuclear. So, I mean, what he does as a rusher, honestly, actually gives him a solid floor. It doesn't sound like a lot. People are like, 34 rushing yards per game. That's 3.4 points per game, guys. Like, so you put that on. Like, think of what Matthew Stafford's numbers would look like. Jared Goff, what their numbers would look like if they got to add 3.4 points per game just from what they're doing as a rusher, right? And the bottom line is there's no chance that Jared Goff or Matthew Stafford can run for 34 yards per game. Is there a chance Kyler could have a spike passing season and throw for 270 yards per game? Yes, he's already done it in his career. Are we saying that he's going to do it? No, but the bottom line is he's got this ability to spike in 2 areas. And if he does spike in both of them in the same season, that's how you unlock that ability to potentially be a top 5 quarterback. Going back to your question, Ian, does he have that top 5 upside? I believe that he does.
We are getting a little bit of a discount, too. He's still got that same QB8 ADP as last year, but it's nowhere near the same in terms of the overall ranks right now, going about 30 picks later than what we saw during the bulk of last offseason. I'm looking at Underdog right now, Dwayne, which, won't specifically fit what we have in redraft land, but just with how many people are playing there right now, I do believe for the time being, it's our best kind of reference for this sort of stuff. Top 51 wide receivers are off the board by the time you get to Kyler. At that point, I really do think it's a bit of a tier drop-off. Top 31 running backs, okay? There's still a couple guys there, Ramondre Stevenson, the Giants running backs, Najee Harris, maybe you can wrap your mind around, but we're really starting to get close to handcuff territory. And also the top 5 tight ends are already off the board. And as we've talked about before, really do think it's more of a 3-man race there. So price really feels right for Kyler. I think it's a good, almost post-hype bounce back opportunity. Hey, maybe he is going to be feeling a little bit more like himself and actually removed from that knee injury. Let's go and talk about some of those top tier tight ends, Dwayne, because we do have Trey McBride coming off a season where he was incredible, man. Looking at that tight end 2 finish, despite only scoring 2 freaking touchdowns, had 147 targets, dwarfing Marvin Harrison Jr., despite McBride actually missing a game. So sure looks like to me, like he is one of, if not the best tight end in the league. Would still give Kittle that, honor, if you will. But man, when you look at the potential target difference, I do have McBride ranked as the tight end 1 overall. Yes, even ahead of Brock Bowers. Is that crazy, Dwayne, or are you just a little jealous you didn't think of doing it first?
No, they're really close. I mean, they're very close together. I'm going Bowers. I mean, because of what he did breaking out as a rookie and what he was in the rookie supermodel. So those 2 things together. But when you look at the projections, they're really close. These 2 guys are close together. The one thing, I think it's fine to target, McBride in late round 2, early round 3. I would just tell people, though, to not get carried away, especially in half PPR. Like in full PPR, you can even move him up a little bit from there. But in half PPR, you don't want to be taking him over Drake London. You don't want to be taking him over Lad McConkey, probably Jonathan Taylor, Achane. Not taking him over any of those guys. But just because, even though he may give you a real nice positional advantage, like the ceiling for those guys for their overall points is just a lot higher if they hit a pure run out than what we get with Trey McBride. The challenge for McBride and Bowers as well, and we talked about this if you think back to our tight end episode about a month or 6 weeks ago. The one thing that bothers me with their profile, these are both very low ADOT guys. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't change, but typically guys kind of own their ADOT and it kind of stays true. If we go back and we think about the true elite tight end, the elite tight end seasons that break fantasy football, Almost all of these guys, Ian, have the ability to work more down the field. Jimmy Graham, he had 2 years with 1,200 plus yards, and he had massive touchdowns of 16 and 11. His average depth of target, 10.5 and 10.1 in those years. Rob Gronkowski, an 1,150 yard pace in 11 games, and then he had another year where he went for 1,300. In those 2 seasons, scored 11 and 17 touchdowns. Unlocking those touchdowns, average depth of target, 10.6, 9.6. Also helps to have Tom Brady throwing you the freaking football. So let's not forget that. Also, Jimmy Graham did have him some Drew Brees. And then if you look at Travis Kelce, man, 3 years at 1,300 plus yards receiving, 12, 11, and 10 touchdowns. Average depth of target, 7.6, 9.4, 9.4. So when we look at McBride, 6.5, 6.2, Bowers also in a very similar range, they're really getting these underneath targets. So they're going to get their PPR points. They're going to get some yards, but that hurts some of the big playability. It also really hurts the touchdown ceiling. And so I just want people to be careful. I love Brock Bowers. I love Trey McBride. I think they're great picks at the end of round 2, round 3, even sometimes in the middle of round 2. Just be careful. Don't get cute and take them over someone like Achane and some of these other wide receivers that we know could go off for 1,600 yards, guys, and 12 touchdowns much more easily than these tight ends. So having said all that, yes, I love Trey McBride. I'm just not sure that McBride or Bowers are back on the same wavelength as some of the elite tight ends that we got used to, like over the last 10 to 15 years, and the upside that they brought us in fantasy football.
If McBride was going 10 picks earlier, like Bowers, who, by the way, look, I do have McBride ranked ahead of Bowers, but you're spot on. They are right next to each other. I had him flip for the bulk of the offseason. I do not, will not besmirk you or anyone else for preferring Bowers after what he did last year. But Bowers, yeah, you are having to take him ahead of guys like Lab McConkey, potentially A.J. Brown, Jonathan Taylor, Bucky Irving. You don't have to do that same sacrifice with Trey McBride. I really do believe there is a tier break at running back after the first 10 guys. Josh Jacobs kind of be in that line, and wide receiver after the first 11 guys, with McConkey in terms of ADP be in that line as well. So for me, McBride is falling in that sweet spot where, no, not every single time am I going to go out on a limb there. You can also get the elite quarterbacks, and these wide receiver too certainly have, a fair say. But Dwain, let's say you are back on Fantasy Island, okay? You are only building one team this entire offseason at the same price point, Trey McBride or Marvin Harrison Jr.?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to lean to McBride. Like, he's shown it 2 years in a row that he can do it at the NFL level. So I don't think that's a very hard decision. The challenge with why I don't take Trey. So what's so hilarious about this is you're right. I don't get much Brock Bowers, but it's not because I get Trey McBride. It's because I wait and get George Kittle in round 4. George Kittle just shouldn't be going around 4, guys. He should be going much closer to these two guys. And George Kittle, by the way, he actually carries more of the profile of those other tight ends that I talked about that could just go so nuclear. Yes, McBride, Bowers, I have them projected for way more targets. But what if George Kittle did get 130 targets? And he has had targets per route run, target shares back in the past before the offense was so loaded, which maybe it's not again. Brandon Ayuk going to miss the beginning of the season most likely. Who knows what he's going to look like? We got Deebo Samuel, who's moved on. It's really an unproven Ricky Pearsall, right? And then we're not trying to jump ahead the 49ers episode here, guys, but we do love George Kittle, so I probably should just shut up about it. But my point being is that he looks more like these other tight ends that historically have gone on to where you're like, whoa, like 22 fantasy points per game, 20 fantasy points per game, and that can break your league. I don't know that Trey McBride and Brock Bowers have that. I think they can be really good picks for you, and you're never going to complain about it, but I don't know if they break your league and win it for you.
Last year, McBride was a 32nd highest scoring flex in PPR points per game. So, if he's going around pick 25 overall, not the biggest stretch, but again, also not a given he's necessarily going to improve upon those already pretty awesome numbers from last year. Dwain, if people are out in a tight end premium league where you are getting the 1.5 point boost for every single reception, then how high are you willing to go with McBride? I mean, we got to be thinking, round 1. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. You should go in the top 10 picks. In that format, in my opinion. You should feel very comfortable, young player in their prime. To your point, the only target competition is Marvin Harrison Jr. We still have some questions about that. So run a lot of 2 wide receiver sets. That helps the tight end. So I think McBride's in a great spot. Brock Bowers also is a first round pick in tight end premium leagues.
Move on to the last fantasy relevant guy in this offense. That is, of course, perennial workhorse stud RB1 James Conner, who, Dwayne, don't look now, seems like he might be undervalued for like the 20th straight year in a row. So I understand father time comes for all of us eventually, but it really is wild, man. Since Conner has joined the Cardinals back in 2021, first year RB35 ADP, finishes RB8. Next year RB15 ADP, finishes RB9. 2023 RB25 ADP, finishes RB13. Last year, RB18 ADP, finishes RB15. I understand that's starting to shrink a little bit, but to Conner's credit, he did have 2 instances last year, played under 30% of the snaps, got knocked out a little bit early with injuries. So, man, pretty much on a Tyler Lockett-esque run, Dwayne, in terms of just perennially smashing that ADP. Do you think Conner can make it 5 years in a row at his currently, once again, affordable RB22 ADP?
Absolutely, man. I mean, what did Trey Benson show us last year? He forced nothing. He didn't force his way into more work. Now, again, we like Trey Benson. He could come on in year 2. Sometimes guys just take longer. But like from what we saw last year, James Conner was able to hold him at bay. I know we had some reports coming out of the combine. Our own Matthew Berry was even reporting that some of the things we were hearing is they kind of view these as being 2 guys that they have 2 running back ones kind of a thing. But then later you kind of heard the other quotes, and Matthew came back and shared what those were. They sounded much more like, okay, like James Conner's our guy, but like we have confidence in Trey Benson, almost like let's build him up in the media, make sure, give him a little love kind of thing. So when I look at James Conner, the other thing, even though we know that like efficiency is not something that's predictive to your volume the next year, it is something that I think people misunderstand about James Conner, Ian. If we look at his yards per carry the last 2 years, 5 and 4.6. The NFL average is 4.3. Yards after contact, 3.9 and 3.9 in 23 and 24. The average for an NFL back is right around 2.9 over the last 3 years. Missed tackles forced per attempt, are you freaking kidding me? 29%. Each of the last 2 years, the NFL average is 20%. Those are all elite running back 1 efficiency metrics. Yards over expected per attempt, 1.02 in 2023 and 0.48 last year. So a guy that's doing more than expected based on the data that we get from Next Gen Stats. So explosive rush rate, man. I think people don't think of this guy as being explosive. 15% and 14% of his carries have gone for 10 plus yards. He checks every box. Like he could come through with an efficiency season where he runs for 5 yards per carry, and the Cardinals are suddenly a better team, and he gets 70% of the workload. And if Kyler just manages to like kind of make the offense, lift the offense, make it a little bit better, give him some more scoring opportunities, man. Like there's upside here. I mean, I think that there's upside with James Conner. Obviously, the price makes it easy to get upside on James Conner. But, I mean, we're talking about a guy that's averaged 15.6, 15.5, and 15.7 fantasy points per game over the last 3 seasons. But he could easily come up with a running back 1 performance. Like I'm just telling you guys, he's finished as that's made him RB 15, 13, and 8 over the last 3 years. So James Conner, it's just silly where he goes at drafts.
Look, he's not Derrick Henry, but a lot of these numbers are close, man. Only Derrick Henry and Jahmyr Gibbs had a higher explosive run rate. And like Derrick Henry, he's in an offense with a dual threat QB where they benefit from that gravity, on the read options. It's going to help widen those lanes and increase the yards per carry. But Lamar and Kyler, these guys aren't factors at the goal line like Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen. Last season, Conner had 11 carries inside the 5-yard line. Kyler Murray, just 1. So it is a situation where anytime they get down inside the 5, we can be pretty confident Conner's going to get his number called at least once, if not more. Again, have no tush-push sort of, shenanigans going on in Arizona. They were trying to do it with a backup quarterback last year. Who was that? I don't remember it. Clayton Tune or someone like that. Clayton Tune. Yeah. So as long as they stop the Clayton Tune shenanigans, I think we'll be okay inside the 5-yard line with James Conner. Not so I'm going to worry about too much. So we'll point out again, Conner was rewarded with a 2-year, $19 million extension last November. So yeah, Trey Benson, perfectly fine handcuff. And I'm happy he is being priced next to guys like Ray Davis, Tyler Algier, the more clear-cut handcuffs now, Dwayne, because he was kind of getting this boost earlier in the offseason, which I didn't so much see. But he's a special athlete, one of the better RAS scores you'll see. He has that theoretical 3-down upside. But, I mean, he only touched the ball 5+ times last year in games where the score was decided by double-digit points. So I do think he would be like Ray Davis, where, okay, you might see Ty Johnson, or in this case, Amari DiMercato, actually playing more snaps on a weekly basis. But I have a really hard time believing Benson wouldn't be leaned upon heavily should Connor miss any time. So Benson, Dwain, talking about, handcuffs tiers, I do think he's going to be up there inside the top 10, if not the top 5, but make no mistake about it. When Connor is healthy, man, you might be able to draft him as the RB22 right now, but I think he's going to be in our top 15 as early as week 1.
Yeah, and I'm projecting more work for Trey Benson than what he got last year. I mean, it's basically impossible to get as little as work as he did last year. So I'm projecting him to grow and roll. And I might be a tad aggressive on it, but I'm with you. I think he's going to be one of those guys that falls into that range of, if the starter were to go down, knock on wood, we never want it to happen. But if it did, like, probably stepping into 80% of what James Conner was getting. And I think he's going to get all the work, to your point, inside the 5, probably, like you said, give away a little bit of those, a little bit of that passing down work, but that's not a guarantee. That's not a guarantee. There's a chance that he just takes over the complete role that we get from James Conner. Also a younger player, so who knows? Maybe he does come out and look even more explosive than what we were getting with James Conner, who is already looking really good. So I do like Trey Benson. I think he is on a short list of like some of the best handcuffs. Again, always look forward to that article from you, Ian. Not sure when that's coming out, but one of my favorite.
Sooner rather than later, my friend. But let's go ahead and get to the win total, resting at 8.5. This is one of the tougher ones, man. Like, if I had to just rank my kind of confidence level on all these, this could very well be 31 or 32. So again, would not be putting the mortgage on it. I'm going to go under. I'm just not convinced enough that the offense was in a good enough position to just, rely on continuity. Defense under, alleged defensive mind, Jonathan Gannon just hasn't exactly been reaching these great heights. That said, if Will Johnson, is someone who they obviously got in round 2 and he can play up to that at times, top 5 billing, at various points of draft season. Also added some additions, to the defensive front. There is a path here. Again, it just more so comes down to my belief in Petzing and Kyler and that offense as a whole not being elite enough for me to take the over. And let's face it, Dwayne, I've made a habit of taking quite a few overs here during the course of this series. So trying to even things out a little bit. So give me under 8.5 wins, albeit not overly confident. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, they've won 8 4-4 games. Obviously, one of those years they didn't have Kyler for much of it, so it's tough to count that. But we're at 8.5 here. We're over these numbers. To your point, they did make some additions. Also, a first-round pick on Walter Nolan, who's going to play right defensive end. This is a 3-4 defense. You talked about Will Johnson, the addition at cornerback. So, I mean, those are probably 2 guys that immediately do make the team better. The question is, where are the wins going to come from? It could be a tough division. We expect to bounce back from the 49ers. We like the Rams and what Sean McVay does. Seattle Seahawks, we have some questions about. So that could be the team that they potentially, could beat up on. But I'm with you. I'm going under on this number. I will say that Kyler Murray has the kind of skill set, if schemed appropriately, that could really just be a major nuisance for defenses to deal with. Now, who knows? Maybe the coaches are trying to do this with Kyler. He's got to buy into the coaching. I don't know. I don't know where this happens, but Kyler still has a unique blend of skills that could make this offense very problematic, even though we know that Trey McBride is the only proven high-end weapon, but maybe Marvin Harrison Jr. makes the jump. So I just, for Cardinal fans, I'm saying there is hope, man. I could see a way that this team wins 10 games. It's just tough, to take the over on 8.5. It's a pretty tough line. Vegas has it set pretty tight.
I think the Rams and the 49ers are legit contenders, not in just the NFC West, but in the NFC as a whole, which again doesn't help matters. And even the Seahawks, both of us actually took their under as well. And that team preview, check it out if you guys like. Still not a team that I expect to only be winning 2 or 3 games or anything like that. So tough division, tough times, you could even say, for the Cardinals, but there are enough talents out there that perhaps they can prove Dwayne and myself flat out wrong. Again, though, either way, we appreciate you guys tuning in to the Fantasy Live Show and hope you'll check out the rest of our team preview series. But for now, just have a great rest of your day. For Dwayne, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Live Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.